The red dust of sagebrush clung to everything, the wooden steps of Whitby's general store, the hem of Nora Hale's faded calico dress, the cracked leather of her boots that had walked too many miles. She stood at the counter, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled the thin gold band from her finger. The ring caught the harsh afternoon light streaming through the grimy window, throwing a small circle of brightness onto the scarred wood. "I need bread," she said, her voice steady despite the hollow ache in her stomach. "Maybe some salt pork if this is worth enough." Mr. Whitby, a man whose face had been weathered into permanent lines of calculation, picked up the ring between his thumb and forefinger. He held it to the light, squinted, then set it down with a soft click that seemed to echo in the quiet store. "Gold's pretty enough," he said, not unkindly, but with the practical tone of a man who'd seen too many desperate folks pass through his door. "But gold don't fill bellies around here. Ma'am, what fills bellies is work, and you don't look like you can break horses or mend fences." Nora's jaw tightened. She'd buried James 3 months back in Missouri soil, sold everything that wasn't nailed down to pay his debts, and walked west because staying meant slow starvation in a place full of ghosts. The ring was the last thing of value she owned, the last piece of a life that had crumbled like old bread. "Then what do you suggest?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "That I lie down in the street and wait to die." The bell above the door jangled, and boots struck the floorboards with measured steps. Nora didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on Mr. Whitby, on her ring sitting small and useless on the counter. "Whitby's right about gold," a man's voice said from behind her, low, unhurried, like creek water over stones. "But he's wrong about the rest." The man moved into her peripheral vision, tall, lean in the way of men who worked from dawn to dark, with hands that showed the scars and calluses of honest labor. His eyes were the color of spring grass, startling against skin bronzed by endless sun. He couldn't have been more than 28, maybe 30. "Evan Calder," Whitby said with a nod. "Come for your father's supplies." "I have." Evan's gaze moved from the storekeeper to Nora, then to the ring. "Ma'am, if you're looking to trade that ring for food, I've got a better proposition." Nora finally looked at him fully. His face was angular, clean-shaven unlike most men in these parts, with a small scar cutting through his left eyebrow. There was no pity in his expression, which she appreciated. Pity was the one thing she couldn't stomach. "I'm listening," she said. "We need a cook out at Calder Creek Ranch. The woman who used to cook for us went back east last month to tend her sick sister. Since then, we've been making do, but 11 men eating burnt beans and half-raw beef twice a day makes for poor work and worse tempers." He paused, studying her hands. "You cook." "I kept house for 6 years." Nora replied. "Fed my husband and his 2 brothers who worked our farm. I can make a meal out of almost nothing. Mr. Calder, and I don't waste supplies. Pays $15 a month, plus board. You'd have your own room off the kitchen, 3 meals a day, and Sundays after breakfast to yourself." He pulled out his wallet, extracted $2, and placed them on the counter. "Whitby, give the lady what she needs for today. Put the rest on our account." Mr. Whitby's eyebrows rose slightly, but he began pulling items from the shelves: a loaf of bread, cheese, some dried beef, a small bag of apples. "Why?" Nora asked. Suspicious now. Nothing came free in this world, especially not from strangers. Evan picked up her ring, examined it briefly, then held it out to her. "Because hungry people make poor decisions. You'd sell this for a few meals, then what, be hungry again in a week." He waited until she took the ring back. "Besides, that ring's worth more than food. It's worth remembering, and you shouldn't trade memories for bread." She slipped the ring back onto her finger, the metal warm from his hand. "When would I start?" "Now, if you're willing. We're heading back soon as the supplies are loaded." Nora looked around the dim store, at the dusty shelves and the flies circling lazily near the ceiling, through the window. She could see the single street of sagebrush, population maybe 200 souls, all of them scrambling to survive in this hard country. She had no room at the boarding house, no prospects, no connections. The choice was already made. "I'll need to gather my things from the boarding house," she said. "I'll wait," Evan replied simply. 20 minutes later, Nora returned with a worn carpet bag containing everything she owned: 2 dresses, undergarments, a Bible that had been her mother's, a bone-handled brush, and a small sewing kit. Evan loaded it onto the wagon without comment, then helped her up onto the seat. His hands were careful, respectful, touching her only at the elbow. The wagon was loaded with sacks of flour, coffee, salt, and other supplies. 2 other men sat in the back, one older with graying temples, the other young, maybe 17. They touched their hat brims to her but said nothing. "That's Samuel," Evan said, indicating the older man. "Been with us 15 years. The boy's Billy, learning the trade." They rode out of town as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the grassland gold and amber. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by the occasional cluster of cottonwoods marking a creek or waterhole. The wind carried the smell of sage and dried grass, and somewhere a hawk cried, high and lonesome. "How far to the ranch?" Nora asked. 3 hours, give or take. We'll be there before full dark." They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Nora found herself stealing glances at Evan's profile, at the way he handled the reins with an easy competence, how his eyes constantly scanned the horizon. This was a man who belonged to this land, who understood its rhythms and dangers. "Your father owns the ranch?" she finally asked. "He does. Came out here in '61 right after my mother passed. Said he needed sky and space to breathe again." Evan's voice carried no bitterness, just fact. "Built it up from nothing, just him, me, and a handful of cattle. Now we run about 3,000 head. And your mother's death? That's why you need a cook. No woman's touch in the house." A small smile crossed his face. "You could say that, though Mother's been gone near 20 years now. We've had cooks come and go. The work's hard. The ranch is isolated. Not everyone can handle the loneliness." "Loneliness and I are old acquaintances. Mr. Calder." He glanced at her then, something shifting in his expression. "Call me Evan. We don't stand much on ceremony at Calder Creek." The sun was touching the horizon when they crested a rise and the ranch spread below them. The main house sat solid and square, built of logs and sealed with mud chinking. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys. To the left stood a massive barn, corrals, and what looked like a bunkhouse. A stream glinted silver in the dying light, winding through a stand of cottonwoods. "Welcome to Calder Creek," Evan said quietly, as they descended toward the ranch. Nora touched the ring on her finger, feeling its familiar weight. She'd come west to escape the past, but maybe what she'd really been looking for was a place to begin again. The kitchen of a cattle ranch wasn't much, but it was work. Honest work. And the man beside her, who'd seen the worth in her beyond gold, perhaps there was something there too, though she wouldn't name it yet. The wagon wheels creaked and complained as they rolled into the yard, and men emerged from the bunkhouse to help unload. Nora squared her shoulders, ready to face whatever came next. She'd traded nothing today, after all, not her ring, not her memories. Instead, she'd found something she hadn't even known she was looking for a chance. The kitchen was a disaster. Nora stood in the doorway, taking in the chaos with the practiced eye of a woman who'd rescued many a neglected space. Grease coated the cast-iron stove like a second skin. Flour had somehow made its way onto every surface, mixing with dust to form a grimy paste. Pots sat unwashed in a tin basin, and something that might have once been bread grew an interesting shade of green on a shelf. "The men have been taking turns cooking," Evan said from behind her, and she could hear the apology in his voice. "As you can see, none of them have much talent for it. Or for cleaning, apparently." Nora set down her carpet bag and rolled up her sleeves. I'll need hot water, lots of it. Lye soap if you have it, vinegar if you don't, and every man who expects to eat needs to haul water. Evan's mouth twitched. Yes, ma'am. He turned to Billy, who'd followed them in. You heard her. Get Samuel and whoever else is around. Water duty. Within minutes, a parade of men trooped through with buckets. Nora heated water on the stove, which, despite its coating of grease, worked well enough once she'd cleaned the burners. She organized as she cleaned, creating order from chaos with systematic efficiency. The pantry revealed more neglect, but also potential. Sacks of beans, flour, cornmeal, and rice sat alongside barrels of salt pork and pickled vegetables. Preserved goods lined dusty shelves. Someone had put up tomatoes and peaches the previous summer. There was coffee, real coffee, and even a precious tin of baking powder. Your father, she asked Evan, who'd stayed to help despite her protests. Mrs. Martinez, our last cook. She was thorough. He carried another load of dirty dishes to her wash station. Father will want to meet you at supper. He's out with the herd, checking the water holes. This drought's been hard. Nora nodded, scrubbing at a particularly stubborn pot. Her hands, already rough from work, reddened in the hot water. How many men need feeding? 11 total, including Father and me. Sometimes more during roundup or branding. She calculated quickly. I'll need a proper schedule. Breakfast at 5, coffee ready by 4:30, noon meal for whoever's close enough to come in, supper at 6, that work. That's fine. He watched her work for a moment. You weren't lying about keeping house. I don't lie, Mr. Calder Evan, she corrected herself. It's a waste of energy. By the time she'd restored the kitchen to working order, the sun had set completely. Lamplight threw shadows on the clean surfaces, and the smell of lye soap had replaced the sour stench of neglect. Nora surveyed her domain with satisfaction, then opened the door to what would be her room. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the barn. Someone had left a quilt folded at the foot of the bed, a wedding ring pattern in blues and browns. She touched it briefly, then returned to the kitchen. There was supper to make. She found salt pork and set it to frying, then mixed cornbread batter with practiced motions. Beans had been soaking, probably Billy's work, so she seasoned them with onion and a precious bit of molasses she'd found. While everything cooked, she sliced the preserved peaches into a dish and made coffee strong enough to float horseshoes. As her father used to say, the men filed in like they were entering church, quiet and uncertain. The older man who'd been on the wagon, Samuel, removed his hat and the others followed suit. They took their seats around the long plank table, eyes on her as she moved between stove and table. Gentlemen, she said, setting down platters. I'm Mrs. Hale. I'll be cooking for you from now on. My rules are simple, no hats at the table, no cursing in my kitchen, and you'll wash your hands before you eat. There's soap and a basin by the door. Use them. A younger man with sandy hair started to protest, but Samuel elbowed him hard. One by one, they rose and washed. When they returned, Nora had filled their plates. The first bite brought complete silence. Then Samuel let out a long breath. Ma'am, I believe you just saved our lives. It's only cornbread and beans, she said, but she was pleased. It's food, said another man, this one with a drooping mustache. Real food, not charcoal and boot leather. The door opened and Thomas Calder entered. Evan's father was an older, broader version of his son, with the same grass-green eyes but silver threading through dark hair. He moved with the careful dignity of a man who'd earned his authority through work, not inheritance. You must be Mrs. Hale, he said, his voice carrying the trace of an Irish accent. Evan said he'd found us a cook. Mr. Calder, she nodded, already moving to fill another plate. He ate slowly, thoughtfully, then set down his fork. Where did you learn to cook? My mother, mostly. then 6 years of practice feeding hungry men. Your husband, Evan, mentioned you're widowed.
3 months now.
She kept her voice neutral, matter of fact. I'm sorry for your loss. He paused. This isn't easy work. Mrs. Hale, these men work hard and eat accordingly. The nearest town is 3 hours away, and the nearest neighbor is an hour's ride. Winter's coming, and winter here isn't gentle. I'm not looking for gentle, Mr. Calder. I'm looking for work. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Then you'll do. After supper, the men cleared their plates, something that apparently hadn't happened before. Judging by Billy's surprised expression, 2 of them, introduced as Jake and Marcus, even offered to dry dishes. Nora refused politely but filed the offer away as a good sign. Later, alone in her small room, she sat on the edge of the bed and removed her boots. Her feet ached, her back hurt, and her hands were raw from scrubbing. But her stomach was full. She had a roof over her head, and tomorrow she'd have purpose. She pulled out her mother's Bible, running her fingers over the worn leather cover. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts.
Mrs. Hale?
Evan's voice came through the door. I wanted to show you something. She opened the door to find him holding a bundle of what looked like dried herbs. Sage, he said, and wild onion. They grow along the creek. Mrs. Martinez used them. Thought you might want to know.
Thank you.
She took the bundle, inhaling the sharp, clean scent. That's thoughtful. He shifted slightly, lamplight catching the angles of his face. That quilt on your bed, it was my mother's. Father thought you should have it, said a room needs some comfort to make it home. It's beautiful work. She was talented with a needle. He paused, seeming to want to say more, then simply touched his hat brim. Breakfast at 5. You said?
Coffee at 4:30. I'll make sure the stove's banked properly tonight. Easier to start in the morning.
He turned to go, then looked back.
Mrs. Hale Nora, you did good today. The men, they haven't looked that content in weeks.
After he left, Nora sat back on the bed, holding the sage bundle. Outside, she could hear the low murmur of voices from the bunkhouse, the distant lowing of cattle, the wind moving through grass. It wasn't home. Not yet, but it was a beginning. She rose early the next morning, before even the faintest hint of dawn. The stove started easily, as Evan had promised. She set coffee to boil and mixed biscuit dough, her hands moving automatically in the familiar rhythm. By the time the men stumbled in, drawn by the smell of coffee and frying bacon she'd found in the cold storage, she had everything ready. Lord have mercy, Samuel said, cradling his coffee cup like a precious thing. I might just survive another day. The younger man with sandy hair, Tom, she'd learned, grinned. Mrs. Hale, if you weren't already married, I'd propose right now. I'm a widow, she said mildly, flipping bacon. And you're barely old enough to shave properly, Tom. The men laughed, and even Thomas Calder's stern face cracked a smile. Evan came in last, his hair still damp from washing. Their eyes met briefly across the kitchen, and something passed between them, not quite understanding. Not yet, but acknowledgement. She was here. She was staying. Mrs. Hale, Thomas Calder said as the men prepared to head out for the day's work. Can you handle a rifle? Well enough. Good. Evan will show you where we keep the Winchester. Sometimes we get wolves, sometimes worse. Best to be prepared. As the kitchen emptied, leaving her alone with the dishes and the day's work ahead, Nora realized she hadn't thought about James's death once this morning. She'd been too busy, too focused on the immediate needs of feeding hungry men. The ring on her finger caught the morning light, but it felt different now, less like a weight, more like a reminder that she'd survived worse than hard work and loneliness. She had a kitchen to run, men to feed, and perhaps, in time, a life to rebuild. It was enough. For now, it was more than enough. The rhythm of ranch life settled over Nora like a worn blanket, familiar in its demands, comforting in its predictability. 4 in the morning meant stoking the stove, grinding coffee beans in the hand mill, mixing biscuit dough while the kitchen slowly warmed. The men relied on these patterns like they relied on sunrise, and she never disappointed them. 2 weeks into her employment, Evan found her in the barn at dawn, staring uncertainly at a brown milk cow. "That's Rosie?" he said, amusement coloring his voice. "She's gentle, but particular about who handles her." "I've never milked a cow," Nora admitted. "We kept goats." "Different technique." He grabbed a stool and bucket, positioning himself beside the cow. "Watch." His hands moved with practiced ease, streams of milk ringing against the metal bucket. Nora studied the motion, the grip, the pull, the rhythm. When he stood and offered her the stool, she took it without hesitation. "Like this?" Her first attempts produced nothing but an irritated tail swish from Rosie. "Firmer grip, steady pull." He knelt beside her, his hand covering hers briefly to demonstrate the motion. His touch was warm, calloused, gone before she could fully register it. "There, feel that." She did both the technique and something else, something she pushed aside. The milk came, tentative at first, then steadier. "My mother used to say civilization started when we learned to milk cows and bake bread," Evan said, watching her progress. "Everything else, churches, schools, governments, came after we figured out breakfast." "Wise woman." "She was." He stood, brushing straw from his knees. "She'd have liked you. She appreciated women who weren't afraid of work." That afternoon, while the men were out checking fence lines, a commotion erupted from the horse corral. Nora ran out to find Evan on the ground, his face white with pain, his right shoulder at an unnatural angle. Billy stood nearby, holding the reins of a wild-eyed young horse. "Shoulders out," Evan said through gritted teeth. "Billy, ride for Doc Morrison." "That's 4 hours round trip," Nora said, kneeling beside him. "I can fix it." Both men stared at her. "You can what?" "My father worked for a doctor back in Ohio. I helped sometimes." She was already examining the shoulder, feeling the displacement. "Billy, help me get him inside. We need to do this before the muscles seize up completely." They got Evan to the kitchen, where she had him sit backward on a chair. "This will hurt," she warned. "Can't hurt worse than it does now." She positioned herself behind him, placed her hands correctly, and said, "On 3, 1." She pulled and rotated on 2, feeling the joint slip back into place with an audible pop. Evan's curse was creative and heartfelt. Then he flexed his fingers experimentally. "I'll be damned. You'll be sore for days. I'll make a sling." She was already reaching for dish towels to fashion one. "No heavy work for a week." "A week. We're moving cattle to the south pasture tomorrow. Then you'll supervise from horseback with your arm in a sling, or you'll risk permanent damage." She tied off the sling with efficient movements. "Your choice. But if you want to keep using that arm past 40, you'll listen." Thomas Calder had entered during this exchange. "Best mind her, son. Woman who can set a shoulder probably knows what she's talking about." That evening, Evan appeared in the kitchen while she was kneading next morning's bread. His arm was still in the sling, but color had returned to his face. "Thank you," he said simply. "Doc Morrison's getting old. Might not have made the ride in time." "You're welcome." She continued kneading, the rhythm soothing. "Though next time, maybe avoid the green horses." "That horse is worth breaking. Good bloodlines, strong chest. He'll make a fine cattle horse once he settles. If he doesn't kill you first. Where's your sense of adventure, Mrs. Hale?" She looked up then, flour dusting her hands. "I'm a widow at 23, working a cattle ranch kitchen in the middle of nowhere. Mr. Calder, I'd say I have plenty of adventure." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, maybe, or recognition. "Fair point." He moved to the stove, pouring himself coffee one-handed. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded, attention back on the dough. "Your husband, what happened?"
Her hands stilled for a moment. "Fever. Took him in 3 days. The doctor said it was typhoid, probably from bad water." She resumed kneading. "He was a good man, worked hard, didn't drink overmuch, never raised a hand to me." "That's a rare thing."
"Is it?" She shaped the dough into loaves.
"Shouldn't it be common?"
"Should be.
Isn't always."
He set down his cup. "My mother used to make bread on Wednesdays and Saturdays. The whole house would smell like heaven. Tell me about her."
He leaned against the counter, careful of his shoulder. "Mary Catherine O'Brien, before she married. Came from Boston with her family. Educated, could play piano and speak French. No one could figure why she married a rough Irish immigrant who wanted to raise cattle. Love makes us do unexpected things. That it does." His eyes met hers briefly. "She taught me to read with the Bible and Shakespeare. Said a man needed both the sacred and the profane to understand the world."
"And which are you, sacred or profane?"
A smile tugged at his mouth.
"Depends on the day." The next morning, she found him in the kitchen before dawn, struggling to dress one-handed. Without comment, she set down the coffee pot and helped him with his shirt buttons.
"This is improper," he said, though he didn't move away. "So is you tearing your shoulder worse trying to prove you don't need help?"
She finished the last button, stepped back.
"There. Now sit. Breakfast is almost ready."
Over the following days, a routine developed. She'd help with his shirt. He'd tell her about the ranch operations, sharing stories of blizzards survived and droughts endured. She found herself looking forward to these quiet morning moments before the others arrived. One evening, she was cutting meat for stew when Evan appeared.
"Let me,"
he offered, though his arm was still healing.
"You're right-handed. That shoulder isn't ready for this kind of work."
"Then I'll use my left."
"And lose a finger, I think not."
She continued cutting, precise and quick. "Unless you're too proud to let a woman handle a knife."
"Pride's got nothing to do with it, just trying to be useful."
She glanced at him, something mischievous in her expression.
"You want to be useful? Tell me which of these cowboys has been stealing my pies. I made 3 yesterday. Only 2 made it to supper."
"That'd be Tom.
Boy's got a sweet tooth, something terrible."
"And you didn't think to stop him?" "Well," he had the grace to look sheepish. "Might have had a slice myself, purely to confirm the thief's identity. You understand."
She threatened him with the knife, mock serious.
Evan called her. "You're worse than the hired hands." He laughed then, really laughed, and she realized it was the first time she'd heard it. The sound was rich, warm, transforming his usually serious face. She found herself smiling in response. "Tell you what," he said. "You teach me that trick with setting shoulders. I'll guard your pies with my life."
"Deal." She went back to cutting meat. "Though I hope we won't need the shoulder trick again. On a ranch, Mrs. Hale, injuries are like sunrise, inevitable and frequent."
That night, Thomas Calder stopped her after supper. "You're good for him," he said quietly.
"Sir." "Evan, haven't seen him laugh in months. Not since—"
He paused. "He was engaged once. Girl from town. Merchant's daughter. Pretty thing, but couldn't handle the isolation. Broke it off last spring, went back east." Nora absorbed this information.
"He seems to manage well enough."
"He manages, but managing isn't living." The older man studied her. "You understand the difference." "I think." She did. Managing was getting through each day, doing what needed doing. Living was finding unexpected moments of joy in fresh bread, in shared laughter, in the way morning light caught on coffee steam. She was beginning to remember the difference. Later, cleaning up the kitchen, she hummed softly an old hymn her mother used to sing. Through the window, she could see Evan by the corral, watching that wild horse with patient determination. His shoulder was still in the sling, but he stood straight, undefeated.
She touched her wedding ring absently, then noticed what she was doing and stopped. For the first time, the gesture felt like habit rather than grief. Progress, perhaps. Or maybe just the natural effect of being too busy, too needed, to dwell on what was lost. Tomorrow would bring more of the same coffee before dawn. Breakfast for hungry men. The endless cycle of cooking and cleaning. But there would also be Evan's quiet presence in her kitchen, stories shared over coffee, the satisfaction of useful work well done. It was enough. More than enough. It was beginning to feel like life. The Harvest Festival came to Sagebrush on the last Saturday of September, when the air held that peculiar quality of summer's end, warm in the sun, cool in the shade, with the smell of cured grass riding every breeze. Thomas Calder announced at breakfast that everyone would attend. "Even Cookie here needs a break from feeding you vultures," he said, using the nickname some of the hands had given Nora. She didn't mind it, there was affection in the term. "I have nothing suitable to wear," she protested. "Nonsense." The elder Calder disappeared and returned with a box. This was Mary's. Been sitting in a trunk 20 years. Shame to let it go to waste. The dress was deep blue cotton with small white flowers. Simple but well made. It smelled of lavender and cedar, perfectly preserved. Nora held it up against herself, and Thomas nodded approval. Mary was about your size, maybe a touch taller, but the hem can be managed. That evening, Nora stood before the small mirror in her room, hardly recognizing herself. The dress fit well enough, and she'd managed to pin her hair into something resembling style. She looked like a rancher's wife. She realized, then pushed the thought away. Evan knocked at her door. "Father sent me to—" He stopped mid-sentence when she opened it. For a moment, he just looked at her, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Will I do?" she asked, aiming for lightness. "You'll more than do—" His voice was quiet, serious. You look fine." Nora. It was the first time he'd used her given name without the Mrs. Attached. The sound of it in his low voice did something to her insides she wasn't ready to examine. The festival filled the main street of Sagebrush with lanterns, music, and people from every ranch and farm within 30 miles. Tables groaned under the weight of pies, preserves, and produce. A fiddle and guitar made music from a makeshift platform, and couples danced on boards laid over the dirt street. Nora entered her apple pie in the contest, standing nervously as Mrs. Pritchard, the mayor's wife, and 2 other women judged the entries. When they announced her second place, beaten only by Mrs. Schmidt, who'd been winning for 15 years, she felt absurdly proud. "Should have been first," Evan said, appearing at her elbow. "I've eaten Mrs. Schmidt's pie. Yours is better." "You're biased. You eat my cooking every day." "Maybe." He was quiet for a moment, watching the dancers. "Would you like to dance?" She looked up at him, surprised. "Your shoulder is well enough for a slow tune." He offered his hand. "Unless you'd rather not." She placed her hand in his. Let him lead her to the boards. The fiddle was playing something sweet and sad, and Evan's hand was warm at her waist, properly positioned, but somehow still intimate. They moved together easily, as if they'd done this before. "You dance well," she said. "Mother insisted. Said a gentleman should know how to dance, even if he lived in the wilderness." He paused. "You're easy to lead." James liked to dance. We'd practice in the kitchen sometimes, when the work was done. He was a lucky man. She looked up at him. To die of fever at 30. To have you for whatever time he did. The words hung between them, weightier than perhaps he'd intended. Nora's breath caught. Around them, other couples swirled, but she was aware only of Evan's hand in hers, the solid warmth of him, the way he smelled of soap and leather and something uniquely his. "Evan," she started, not sure what she meant to say. Well, the Calder boy found himself a dancing partner. The voice was slurred, aggressive. A man she didn't recognize stood at the edge of the dance floor, whiskey evident on his breath even from several feet away. He was looking at Nora in a way that made her skin crawl. "Vern," Evan said, his voice carefully neutral. "Didn't know you were back in town." "Got back yesterday. Heard Calder Creek had a new cookie. Didn't hear she was a beauty." Vern's eyes traveled over Nora in obvious assessment. "Widow, aren't you must get lonely out there?" Evan's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Move along, Vern." "Just being friendly." Vern grinned, ugly and knowing. "Widow might want some company." "No, I wouldn't mind." "You'll mind your manners or you'll be minding your broken jaw." Evan's voice had gone deadly quiet. Samuel appeared as if from nowhere, Tom and Billy flanking him. "Problem here, boss." Vern looked at the four men, calculated odds, and backed away with raised hands. "No problem. Just saying hello." He tipped his hat mockingly to Nora. "Ma'am." After he'd gone, Evan led her away from the dance floor. "I'm sorry about that." "Not your fault. Every town has men like him." "He's been trouble before. Works sometimes for Dwyer over at Double Fork." "I don't like him knowing you're at the ranch." "I can handle myself. Evan." "I know you can. Doesn't mean you should have to." They found a quieter spot near the church, where benches had been set up. The moon was rising, full and bright, turning everything silver and shadow. "Can I tell you something?" Evan asked suddenly. She nodded. "I was engaged once. Margaret Donner, the banker's daughter, prettiest girl in 3 counties. Everyone said, we courted for a year, got engaged last Christmas." He paused, looking at his hands. "She lasted exactly 1 month at the ranch. Said it was too quiet, too lonely, too hard. Went back to her father's house and then took the train east to live with an aunt in Chicago." "I'm sorry." "I'm not." He looked at her then, direct and honest. "I thought I loved her, but what I loved was the idea of her, the reality. We didn't fit. She wanted me to be something I'm not a town man. A banker, maybe. Someone who came home clean and took her to socials every week." "And what do you want?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Someone who sees the beauty in sunrise over the prairie. Someone who understands that some things are worth working for, even when the work is hard. Someone who can find satisfaction in a well-cooked meal, a warm fire, a job done right." "That's a lot to ask." "Is it?" He turned to face her fully. "You've been at the ranch 6 weeks. Nora, have you been unhappy?" She thought about it, really thought about it. The work was hard. Yes, the isolation was real, but there was also the satisfaction of feeding hungry men who appreciated her efforts. The peace of early morning in her kitchen. The comfortable evening conversations with Evan and Thomas. "No," she said finally. "I haven't been unhappy." "Neither have I. First time in months I can say that." The weight of what he wasn't quite saying settled between them. Nora's heart beat faster, but she wasn't ready. Not yet. The wound James's death had left was still too fresh, the future too uncertain. "We should get back," she said softly. "Your father will wonder where we've gone." Evan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course." They walked back to the festival, careful not to touch. But something had shifted between them. Subtle as the seasons change, but just as inevitable. As they reached the others, Mrs. Schmidt approached with a conspiratorial smile. "Mrs. Hale, might I have that pie recipe? My husband claims yours is better, though he'd never say so publicly." Nora shared the recipe gladly, feeling a small warmth at being included, being seen as part of the community rather than an outsider. The ride home was quiet. Thomas dozing in the wagon bed while Evan drove and Nora sat beside him. The moon lit their way, and coyotes called in the distance. When they reached the ranch, Evan helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering just a moment at her waist. "Thank you for the dance," he said. "Thank you for asking." She went inside, changed out of Mary Calder's dress carefully, hanging it with reverence. Through her window, She could see Evan by the corral, checking the horses one last time before bed. He moved with easy confidence, at home in his world in a way Margaret Donner probably never understood. Nora touched her wedding ring, twisted it gently. James would want her to be happy. She knew. He'd been practical that way, unsentimental about things that couldn't be changed. But knowing and feeling were different things, and her heart wasn't ready to let go. Not entirely. Still, as she lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling for the night, she admitted to herself what she'd been avoiding. She was beginning to care for Evan Calder. Not just as an employer, not just as a friend, but as something more. Something that both frightened and thrilled her. Tomorrow would bring Sunday breakfast. The one day she made something special, cinnamon rolls. Maybe, or griddle cakes with the last of the summer berries. Evan would come early to help with the coffee, as had become his habit. They would talk or not talk. Comfortable either way. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was possibility. And for now, that was enough. The first sign of trouble came 3 days after the Harvest Festival, a section of fence cut clean through. 20 head of cattle wandering onto Double Fork land. Samuel found them at dawn, brought them back, but his face was grim when he reported to Thomas Calder at breakfast. Wire was cut deliberate-like, he said, accepting coffee from Nora. No break from weather or animals. Someone took cutters to it. Thomas's jaw tightened. Dwyer's trying to provoke something. Who's Dwyer? Nora asked, refilling cups around the table. Silas Dwyer owns Double Fork Ranch, north of us. Evan's voice was flat. He's been buying up smaller spreads for years, usually after some misfortune befalls the owners. Misfortune he helps along, Tom added darkly. That's speculation, Thomas warned, though his expression suggested he agreed. What we know is, he wants our water rights. Calder Creek runs year-round, even in drought. His land's got seasonal streams at best. 2 days later, they found a dead coyote in the small pool where the creek widened poisoned first, then dumped to foul the water. The men spent hours hauling the carcass out, draining the pool, letting fresh flow clean it. That evening, Nora was checking supplies in the pantry when she heard Evan and his father talking in low voices in the main room. He's escalating, Evan said. First the fence, now the water. We can't prove it was him. We don't need proof to know. Nora emerged from the pantry. Both men looked up, slightly guilty, as if trying to protect her from harsh realities. I'm not a child, she said. If there's danger, I should know. Thomas and Evan exchanged glances. Finally, Thomas nodded. Dwyer wants this ranch. More specifically, he wants our water. He's got 3 times our land but half our water access. In dry years, that matters. So he's trying to drive you out. Trying to weaken us, Evan corrected. Make us vulnerable to an offer we can't refuse. Or, he paused, make us desperate enough to sell cheap. Nora thought about this, remembering something from her late husband's store. James used to talk about men like that, said they didn't really want the land or the cattle. They wanted control, the power to decide who thrives and who fails. Your husband was a wise man, Thomas said. He was a shopkeeper who extended too much credit and died with more IOUs than cash. Nora said pragmatically, but he understood people. This Dwyer, he doesn't need your water, does he? He wants it. There's a difference. Evan leaned forward. What do you mean? I mean, men who need things negotiate. Men who want things take. She moved to the stove, checking the coffee pot. Question is, what's he willing to do to take it? The answer came a week later. Nora woke to the sound of gunfire, distant but distinct. She grabbed her shawl and the Winchester Evan had shown her how to use. Stepping out into the pre-dawn darkness, lights bobbed in the distance, toward the south pasture. More shots. Then shouting. She could see figures on horseback, lit momentarily by muzzle flashes. "Sss, get back inside," Evan's voice, urgent and commanding. He was running from the barn, rifle in hand. "Nora, get inside now." She retreated to the doorway, but didn't go in, keeping the rifle ready. Thomas emerged from the house. Samuel and the others from the bunkhouse. All armed, they mounted horses and rode toward the chaos. An hour passed, feeling like days. Finally, the men returned. Evan's shirt was torn, blood seeping through at the shoulder, the same one she'd reset weeks ago. "Just a graze," he said when he saw her face. "We drove them off." Who was it? Though she already knew. Couldn't say for certain. Dark, faces covered. His eyes were hard. But they were trying to scatter the herd. Would have succeeded if Jake hadn't been out checking a sick cow, seen them coming. She tended Evan's wound. It was indeed just a graze, though it would scar. As she worked, she noticed something. "There's a new man. At breakfast yesterday. Wade something." Wade Coulter came looking for work last week. Good with horses. Had references from a spread in Texas. Evan winced as she applied whiskey to the wound. "Why?" He asked questions. About the water rights, about how many men you employ. Said he was just curious about the operation, but Thomas looked thoughtful. But now you wonder if he was gathering information. "I don't trust easily, Mr. Calder. Comes from being a shopkeeper's wife. You learn to spot when someone's running a game." The next morning, Wade was gone. His bunk was empty. His gear cleared out. He'd left in the night, confirming Nora's suspicions. "I'll ride to town." Evan said, "See if anyone's seen him." "Take Samuel," his father ordered. "No one rides alone until this is settled." While they were gone, Nora noticed other signs, fresh horse tracks near the creek that didn't match any of their mounts. A fence post that looked like someone had been testing its stability. She mentioned these to Thomas, who grew increasingly grim. "He's planning something bigger," the older man said. "This harassment is just the beginning." Evan returned from town with troubling news. Wade Coulter was seen at Double Fork, and Dwyer's been hiring men, not ranch hands gunmen, the kind that drift through looking for trouble and pay. That night, Nora couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, watching the moonlit yard. When she saw movement by the barn, her heart jumped, but it was just Evan, standing guard. She pulled on her shawl and brought him coffee. "You should be sleeping," he said, accepting the cup gratefully. "So should you." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the night. Finally, Evan spoke. "I won't let him drive us off. This land. It's everything my father built, everything we've worked for." "I know. If things get worse, if there's real violence, you should go back to town. Until it's over." She looked at him sharply. "Would you go back to town if I were threatened?" "That's different." "How?" He turned to face her fully. "Because He stopped, struggling with words. "Because losing you would be worse than losing the ranch." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Nora's heart raced. But before she could respond, a light flickered in the distance. A torch. Then another. "Fire!" someone yelled from the bunkhouse. "They're torching the hay!" The next minutes were chaos. Men ran with buckets, forming a line from the creek. The hay shed was already ablaze, but they might save the barn if they worked fast. Nora joined the line, passing buckets until her arms ached. Through the smoke and confusion, she saw riders, 4, maybe 5, circling the edges of the light, taking shots to keep the men from effectively fighting the fire. One rider came too close, and she recognized him, Vern Tate, the drunk from the Harvest Festival. Without thinking, she grabbed the Winchester, aimed, and fired. The shot went wide but close enough to make Vern's horse rear. He cursed, wheeling away into the darkness. By dawn, they'd saved the barn but lost the hay shed and half their winter feed. The men stood exhausted and soot-covered, surveying the damage. "This ends now," Thomas said quietly. "I'm writing to the sheriff." "Sheriff's 2 days away," Samuel pointed out. "And he won't move without proof."
Then we get proof. Evan said. His face was hard, aged by exhaustion and anger. We post watches, we document everything, and we make sure Dwyer knows we won't be pushed. Nora looked at the burnt ruins of the hay shed, at the exhausted men, at the ranch that had become her home. She thought of Dwyer, sitting comfortable at Double Fork, planning his next move like it was all a chess game. "He's not after the ranch," she said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. "He's after the water. The ranch is just what's in the way." "Same thing," Tom said. "No, it's not." She was working through the thought as she spoke. "If he just wanted you gone, he'd make an offer. Maybe try to buy your note at the bank. But he's trying to break you. Why? Because he needs you desperate. Because—" She paused, understanding dawning. "Because there's something about the water rights he needs, something that requires your cooperation, not just your absence." Thomas and Evan exchanged glances. "The Territorial Water Commission?" Thomas said slowly. "They're meeting next month. Dwyer's been petitioning to dam Upper Calder Creek, create a reservoir on his land, but he needs downstream rights holders to agree." "And you won't agree?" "Dam would cut our water by half in dry years. Kill the ranch slow but sure." Nora nodded. "So he's trying to kill it fast instead. Force you to sell to him. Then he has both upstream and downstream rights." "Clever woman," Evan said, and there was admiration in his voice. "You're right. This isn't about land. It's about controlling the whole watershed." As the sun rose higher, painting the damaged ranch in unforgiving light, Nora made a decision. She'd lost one home to circumstances beyond her control. She wouldn't lose another to a greedy man's ambition. "Then we stop him," she said simply, "whatever it takes." Dawn came pale and wrong on the day everything changed. Nora woke to silence, no birds, no cattle lowing. Even the wind had died. She dressed quickly, unease prickling her spine. Through her window, she saw Evan and Samuel standing rigid by the corral, staring north. Then she saw them riders, 20 or more, approaching in a wide line from Double Fork's direction. The morning sun glinted off rifle barrels. "Get everyone up," Evan shouted, already running for the house. "They're coming!" The next moments blurred together. Thomas emerged with his rifle, shouting orders. Men scrambled from the bunkhouse, taking positions behind water troughs, wagons, anything that might stop a bullet. Nora grabbed the Winchester and a box of shells, her hands steady despite her racing heart. "Stay inside," Evan commanded, checking his revolver. "The hell I will." She positioned herself at the kitchen window, barrel resting on the sill. "This is my home too." There was no time to argue. The riders had stopped just outside rifle range, spreading into a crescent. Silas Dwyer rode forward alone, arrogant in his confidence. "Calder," he called. "Let's discuss terms." "Nothing to discuss," Thomas shouted back. "Get off my land." "Your land won't be worth much with no water. I've got men at your creek right now. Give me what I want, or they blow the natural dam. Flood takes your bottomland. Drought takes the rest." Nora's mind raced. The natural dam, a rock formation where the creek narrowed. If destroyed, it would indeed flood initially, then leave them with an uncontrolled stream, useless for irrigation. "You're bluffing," Evan called. Dwyer smiled. "Boy upstream should be lighting the fuse right about." A distant boom echoed across the prairie. Smoke rose from the creek's direction. Dwyer hadn't been bluffing. "Now," Dwyer continued conversationally, "you can sign over the water rights peaceful-like, or we can do this the hard way. Either way, I get what I want. If you destroyed that dam, you hurt yourself too." Thomas said, "That water feeds the whole valley. I've got engineers ready to build a proper dam upstream, control the flow, sell water to whoever can pay. Progress. Calder, you're just in the way." The first shot came from Dwyer's side. Someone got nervous, or maybe it was planned. Glass shattered in the main house. Then everything exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from both sides. Nora aimed carefully, squeezed the trigger. A rider cursed and grabbed his shoulder. She levered another round, fired again. The kitchen window exploded, showering her with glass. She dropped, crawled to another position. Through the smoke and noise, she saw Evan and Billy pinned behind an overturned wagon, taking heavy fire. 3 riders were trying to flank them. Without thinking, Nora burst from the kitchen door, running low across the yard. "The barn!" she shouted to Samuel. "They're going for the barn!" Sure enough, 2 men with torches were approaching from the blind side. Samuel and Jake wheeled to face them. Nora made it to Evan's position, sliding in beside him as bullets whined overhead. "I told you to stay inside." "And let them burn us out." She fired at a rider trying to advance. "We need to get to the horses. If they stampede them, we'll be trapped." He understood immediately. "Billy, cover us." They ran for the corral, Nora's dress catching on the fence as she vaulted over. The horses were panicked, milling and screaming. She grabbed Rosie's halter. The milk cow was oddly calm and used her as a shield while opening the gate. "Drive them toward Dwyer's men," Evan shouted. It was insane, but it might work. Nora slapped horses' rumps, yelling, driving them out and toward the attacking line. 30 horses in full stampede were a force of nature. Dwyer's men scattered, their careful formation broken. In the confusion, she saw opportunity. 3 riders had been thrown, their horses bolting. One was Vern Tate, struggling to his feet, rifle lost. She grabbed a pitchfork from the barn wall and advanced on him. "Well, well," he sneered, pulling a knife. "Little widow wants to play." He lunged. She sidestepped, bringing the pitchfork handle across his knee. He went down, howling. She kicked the knife away, then pressed the pitchfork tines to his throat. "Yield," she said coldly. His eyes widened. "You wouldn't—" She pressed harder, drawing a bead of blood. "Try me." I yield. The battle was turning. The stampede had broken Dwyer's momentum, and now riders from neighboring ranches were arriving. The smoke had been seen for miles, and frontier justice meant neighbors helped neighbors against raiders. But Dwyer himself had made it to the house. Nora saw him kick in the front door, disappear inside. Thomas was in there. Wounded, she'd seen him take a bullet in the leg earlier. She ran for the house, finding chaos inside. Dwyer had Thomas at gunpoint in the main room. Evan had followed, his gun trained on Dwyer, but it was a standoff. "Drop it, boy, or your father dies." "You kill him, you die next," Evan said steadily. "Maybe, but he'll still be dead." Nora moved silently through the kitchen door behind Dwyer. She could see Evan's eyes track to her, then deliberately away. He kept talking, holding Dwyer's attention. "You've lost Dwyer. Your men are scattered. The territorial marshal will hear about this. I've got lawyers who can make this look like self-defense. You attacked my men on open range." "That's a lie." "Truth is what money says it is." Nora picked up the heavy iron skillet from the stove, still warm from breakfast. She swung it with all her strength, connecting with the back of Dwyer's head. He dropped like a felled steer. "Never liked that man," she said conversationally, though her hands were shaking. Evan kicked Dwyer's gun away, then caught Nora as her knees buckled. "You magnificent, reckless woman." "Is it over?" Through the window, they could see Dwyer's remaining men fleeing, pursued by riders from 3 neighboring ranches. Sheriff Morrison would arrive eventually, but frontier justice had already spoken. "It's over," Thomas said, limping to join them. "Thanks to you, Mrs. Hale." She looked at the damaged room, bullet holes in walls, windows shattered, furniture overturned. Then she looked at Evan, blood on his cheek from a graze, eyes warm with something deeper than gratitude. "This is my home," she said simply. "Nobody takes my home." They tied Dwyer up to wait for the sheriff. His men, those who hadn't fled, were likewise secured in the barn. The neighboring ranchers helped put out the fires Dwyer's men had started, saved what they could. As the sun set, Nora stood in her kitchen window, broken, walls scarred, but still standing. She was making coffee for the dozens of men who'd come to help, moving automatically through familiar motions. Evan appeared beside her, a bandage on his arm, soot and blood on his clothes. "Nora!" She looked up at him. "When I saw you run across that yard, through the bullets..." He stopped, swallowed hard. "I've never been so terrified in my life. And when you went after Tate with that pitchfork, I told you I could handle myself." "You did. You do. But Nora, I need to say this now, because I almost lost the chance today." He took her hands, flour-dusted and shaking slightly. "I love you. I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving James, but..." She stopped him with a finger to his lips. "Evan called her. I just hit a man with a skillet and threatened another with a pitchfork. I think we're past proper courtship rules." Despite everything, he laughed. "Is that a yes?" "That's a, we survived this. We'll figure out the rest." She squeezed his hands. "But Evan, I love you too. Somewhere between the coffee and the gunfire, I fell in love with you." He kissed her then, there in the ruined kitchen with the smell of gunpowder still in the air, and neighbors milling about outside. It wasn't romantic in any traditional sense, but it was real and true, and theirs. When they pulled apart, Thomas was standing in the doorway, grinning despite his bandaged leg. "About damn time," he said. "Now, can we get some of that coffee? We've got a ranch to rebuild." Nora laughed, wiping tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Coffee coming right up, though someone needs to board up that window before the wind gets worse." "I'll do it," Samuel said, appearing with boards and nails. "Can't have our cook catching cold." As the kitchen filled with people, neighbors, ranch hands, even the territorial marshal who'd finally arrived, Nora moved among them, pouring coffee, offering what food hadn't been destroyed. This was her place. These were her people, and they'd fought for each other. The ranch was damaged, but not destroyed. Dwyer would face justice, frontier justice, and legal justice both. And in the midst of violence and chaos, love had somehow taken root. Tomorrow would bring the hard work of rebuilding, but tonight, with Evan's hand finding hers whenever he passed, with Thomas calling her daughter for the first time, with rough men treating her with gentle respect, tonight she was home. The sheriff took Dwyer and his men away in chains 3 days after the attack. The territorial judge, riding circuit, would hear the case within the month. Meanwhile, neighbors came from every direction to help rebuild what had been destroyed. The frontier code was simple today. You help rebuild a barn. Tomorrow, someone helps rebuild yours. Nora's hands were bandaged from burns she'd gotten fighting the fire, but she still commanded her kitchen like a general. Women from neighboring ranches had arrived with food and supplies, but this was her domain, and she directed the feeding of 30-some workers with calm efficiency. "You need to rest those hands," Evan said for the 5th time that morning, catching her lifting a heavy pot. "I need to feed people who are rebuilding our home," she countered, though she let him take the pot. "Our home," he repeated the words softly. "I like the sound of that." She had just turned back to her biscuit dough when Thomas Calder cleared his throat from the doorway. He was using a cane, his legs still healing, but his eyes were bright with purpose. Evan, Nora, a word. They followed him to the main room, now boarded where windows had been shot out. He lowered himself carefully into his chair, then looked at them both. "I'm not a man for fancy speeches," he began. "But what I saw 3 days ago, Nora, you fought for this ranch like it was your birthright. You've earned your place here not through marriage or blood, but through courage." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small wooden box. This was Mary's, brought from Ireland by her grandmother. He opened it to reveal a hair comb, silver and pearl, delicate despite its age. I'd planned to give it to Evan's bride someday. Seems that day has come, if you'll have us." Nora's eyes filled.
"Mr. Calder. Thomas, or better yet, Father, that's what you'll be calling me soon enough. I expect—" Evan knelt beside her chair, taking her bandaged hands gently. "I know this isn't the romantic proposal you deserve. You deserve flowers and music and me in a clean shirt at least. But Nora Hale, will you marry me? Will you stay here not as our cook, but as my wife, as mistress of this ranch?" She looked at his earnest face, dust still in his hair from rebuilding, a cut on his cheek from the fight, his eyes full of love and hope. Then she looked at Thomas, offering her his blessing and his late wife's treasure. "I need to tell you something first," she said quietly. She reached for the chain around her neck, pulled out James's ring that she'd moved there after the attack. "I loved my first husband. Part of me always will. Can you accept that? Can you accept that I nearly married the wrong woman? That I have my own ghosts? Then we're both bringing past to this future. Seems fair." Evan's smile was gentle. "Is that a yes?" "Yes," she laughed, tears streaming. "Yes, you impossible man. Though I'm keeping my kitchen rules, no cursing, no hats at table. Deal." He kissed her hands, bandages and all. Thomas stood with effort, embraced them both. "We'll have the wedding here, soon as the house is repaired. Make it a celebration of rebuilding, of survival." Word spread as frontier news always did, fast and embellished. Within a week, every woman in 3 counties knew that Evan Calder was marrying the widow who'd fought off Dwyer's gang with a pitchfork and a skillet. The rebuilding continued at breakneck pace. The barn rose from its ashes, neighbors contributing lumber they could ill spare. The natural dam at the creek was beyond full repair, but they managed to shore it up enough to control the flow. Windows arrived from town on a special freight wagon, and slowly the house began to look like a home again. 2 weeks before the wedding, Nora was picking through fabric samples Mrs. Schmidt had brought when she heard commotion outside. A fancy carriage had pulled up unusual for Calder Creek. A woman stepped out, dressed in traveling clothes that cost more than most ranch hands made in a year. Margaret Donner, Evan's former fiancée. She was everything Nora wasn't: tall, elegant, smooth hands that had never known work. Her dress was deep green silk, her hair arranged in perfect ringlets. "I heard about the trouble," Margaret said to Evan, who'd emerged from the barn. "I came as soon as I could." Nora watched from the doorway as Evan approached his former love. Her heart clenched, but she stayed still, trusting. "Margaret, you came a long way for nothing." "Evan, please, I made a mistake. I was young, frightened, but I've had time to think." "I'm getting married in 2 weeks." Margaret's perfect composure cracked. "To her, the cook. To the woman who stood beside me when men came to take our home. To the woman who works from dawn to dusk and never complains. To the woman who fits here, who fits me. She's a nobody, a widow who traded work for food." Nora stepped out then, flour still on her apron, burns still healing on her hands. "You're right, I am nobody special. Just a woman who knows what matters." Margaret looked between them, saw something that made her shoulders drop. "You love her." "I do. And she loves you." "She does," Nora answered. Margaret was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Then I wish you happiness." She turned to go, then looked back. "Though really, Evan, a cook." "The best cook in the territory," he said proudly, "and the bravest woman I know." After Margaret's carriage disappeared, Evan found Nora in the kitchen, attacking bread dough with unusual vigor. "You all right?" "She's beautiful. She's decorative. There's a difference." He caught her floury hands. "Nora, I need you to understand something. Margaret was what I thought I should want: refined, educated, ornamental. You're what I actually need: strong, capable, real. When trouble came, She ran. You grabbed a skillet. Despite herself. Nora laughed. That's going to be the story forever. Isn't it the skillet? Our grandchildren will tell it to their grandchildren. The wedding day dawned clear and cool. October painting the prairie gold. The house was repaired. Glass gleaming in new windows. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food from every ranch family within riding distance. Nora wore her mother's wedding dress, altered by Mrs. Schmidt and the other women. Thomas's gift, the silver comb, held her veil. She carried no flowers, they were scarce in October, but Billy had made her a bouquet of prairie grass and sage that smelled like home. The circuit preacher performed the ceremony in the yard, with the mountains as backdrop, and the whole community as witness. When he asked for objections, Samuel muttered loud enough for all to hear, "Object hell. We've been waiting for this since she fixed that first breakfast." Even the preacher smiled. Evan's vows were simple. "I promise to protect you, provide for you, and never complain about coffee strong enough to float horseshoes." Nora's were equally plain. "I promise to stand beside you, build this life with you, and only hit people with skillets when absolutely necessary." The laughter that followed blessed the union as much as any prayer. When Evan kissed his bride, the cheer that went up could be heard at Double Fork, where Dwyer's former ranch was being sold to pay his legal debts and damages. The celebration lasted until stars filled the sky. Stories were told of the battle, each retelling making Nora's pitchfork charge more dramatic. Thomas gave a speech about building something worth fighting for. The territorial marshal, who'd stayed for the wedding, declared it the finest party he'd attended in 20 years of frontier service. Late that night, in the quiet of their room now, not just hers, Nora unpinned the silver comb from her hair. "Your mother would have been proud today," she told Evan. "She would have loved you, a woman who can cook, fight, and rebuild. You're everything she valued." Nora removed James's ring from the chain around her neck, placed it carefully in the wooden box with her mother's Bible, not discarding the past, but making room for the future. "No regrets?" Evan asked, watching her. "None. This is where I belong, where we belong." Outside, the wind sang through the new barn boards, and somewhere a coyote called to the moon. But inside was warmth and love, and the promise of all the mornings to come coffee at 4:30, breakfast at 5, and a life built on work, courage, and choosing each other every day. The frontier was hard, unforgiving, dangerous, but it was also theirs, and they would face it together, with skillets and pitchforks if necessary. "Welcome home, Mrs. Calder," Evan whispered. "I've been home since the day you wouldn't let me trade my ring," she replied. "It just took us a while to realize it." Spring came to Calder Creek like a blessing after the hardest winter anyone could remember. The snow that had buried the ranch in December was now feeding the creek, running full and strong between banks lined with new grass. Nora stood at her kitchen window, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold, her hand resting on the gentle swell beneath her apron. "Coffee's going to float away if it gets any stronger," Evan said from behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his hands joining hers. "Billy likes it strong, says it helps him think straight." "Billy's 19. Nothing helps him think straight." Evan pressed a kiss to her temple. "How are you feeling?" "Like I swallowed a watermelon that's learning to dance." She leaned back against him. "Your child is restless this morning." "Our child," he corrected. "And probably hungry. Takes after their mother." The kitchen door banged open and Thomas entered, stamping mud from his boots. At 71, he moved slower but still worked from dawn to dusk. "Those new calves are thriving," he announced. "And Samuel says the water rights paperwork came through. Official and legal Calder Creek water stays with Calder Creek." It had taken months of legal battles after Dwyer's arrest, but they'd won. Dwyer himself was serving 5 years in territorial prison, his ranch divided among the smaller spreads he'd tried to ruin. "We should frame that paper," Nora said, pouring Thomas his coffee. "Put it right next to Mother Calder's portrait." The portrait had been Evan's Christmas gift to her. He'd commissioned an artist from Denver to restore the damaged painting of his mother. It now hung in the dining room, watching over every meal with kind eyes. "She'd have been pleased," Thomas said, settling into his chair. "A grandchild on the way, the ranch secure, and a daughter-in-law who can shoot straight and cook better." The morning routine unfolded as it had for months now: breakfast for the hands, discussions of the day's work, the comfortable rhythm of a working ranch. But Nora noticed Evan and Thomas exchanging glances, some secret communication. "What?" she finally demanded. "Nothing," Evan said too innocently. Evan called her. "You cannot lie to save your life. What are you planning?" Before he could answer, she heard voices, many voices, and the creak of wagon wheels. She moved to the door to see a line of wagons approaching, loaded with lumber. "What's this?" "Your birthday present," Evan said. "A few days early, but the weather's good for building." "My birthday's not—" She stopped. In the chaos of the past months, she had forgotten her own birthday was next week. "We're adding on," Thomas explained. "2 more rooms for the main house. Figured that baby will need a nursery. And maybe someday siblings." "Mrs. Schmidt climbed down from the lead wagon, followed by other neighbor women. "And while the men build, we're having a quilting bee. Can't have a baby without proper blankets." Nora's eyes filled. "You all came for this." "Honey," Mrs. Schmidt said, "you fought off raiders with kitchen utensils. Least we can do is help ready your nest." The day became a celebration of community. Men raised walls while women stitched quilts. Children ran between the workers, carrying nails and water. The ranch that had nearly been destroyed 6 months ago was now being expanded, made stronger. As the sun reached its peak, Nora was refilling water buckets when she felt the first pain, sharp, unexpected. She gripped the pump handle, breathing through it. Evan was beside her instantly. "What's wrong?" "I think—" Another pain. "I think the baby's coming." "But it's too early. You've got another month." "Tell that to the baby." Organized chaos ensued. Mrs. Schmidt took charge. Having delivered half the babies in the county, Evan was banished to pace outside while the women took over the bedroom. Thomas sat with him, offering whiskey and awkward comfort. Longest hours of a man's life. Thomas said, "When Mary had Evan, I wore a groove in the porch boards." Inside, Nora gripped the bedpost, Mrs. Schmidt coaching her through each pain. "You fought off 20 men, dear. This is just one very small person wanting out." "Those men weren't trying to split me in half," Nora gasped. But she was strong, stronger than she knew. As the sun set, painting the new walls of the addition gold, a cry pierced the air, healthy, angry, alive. "It's a girl," Mrs. Schmidt announced, opening the door. "Perfect and loud." Evan burst in, his face a mix of joy and terror. The baby was wrapped in one of the new quilts, her face red and scrunched, a shock of dark hair visible. "A daughter," he breathed, taking the bundle with infinite care. "Look, Nora, she's perfect." "Mary," Nora said softly. "Mary Catherine Calder, for your mother." Thomas, who'd entered quietly, made a sound suspiciously like a sob. She'd have been so honored. Little Mary opened her eyes, green like her father's, her grandfather's, and studied the world with serious consideration. Then she yawned and settled into sleep, apparently deciding it would do. The neighbors stayed another day to finish the addition, working with quiet efficiency so as not to disturb the baby. When they left, the house had 2 new rooms, a nursery, and what would someday be a child's bedroom. That first night with the baby, Nora sat in the rocking chair Evan had made, nursing Mary while he sat on the floor beside them, one hand on Nora's knee. "Are you happy?" she asked.
Happy doesn't cover it. Grateful, maybe amazed, terrified. All of that, she agreed. But happy too. Through the window, she could see the lights of the bunkhouse where the hands were undoubtedly toasting the baby's arrival. Beyond that, moonlight silvered the creek that gave the ranch its name, flowing steady and sure. A year ago, she'd stood in Whitby's store with nothing but a wedding ring and desperation. Now she had a home, a family, a purpose. The ring that had seemed worthless then sat in her jewelry box, no longer worn but kept a reminder of one journey's end and another's beginning. "I never thanked you," she said suddenly. "For what?" "For seeing what I could be, not what I was. For giving me work when you could have just given charity. You gave as good as you got. Nora, better. You gave us a home again, not just a house. You gave me love I didn't think I'd find." Mary stirred, making small sounds, and they both froze until she settled again. "She's going to be trouble," Evan predicted. "Look at that chin stubborn already. Wonder where she gets that from. Her mother, obviously. Woman who won't back down from anything." Spring moved towards summer, and life found its rhythm. Nora was back in her kitchen by week's end. Mary in a cradle Samuel had carved, rocking gently while her mother cooked. The hands competed to make the baby smile. First, Billy won with a ridiculous face that made everyone laugh. The water rights certificate was indeed framed and hung with pride. The ranch prospered with reliable water and good management. Other spreads that had suffered under Dwyer's schemes recovered too, the valley becoming productive again. One evening in late May, as Nora stood in the doorway watching Evan teach Billy to break a new horse, Mary sleeping in her arms, she thought about the twists that had brought her here. James would have been pleased. She thought, he'd always said she was stronger than she knew. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the world in shades of gold and rose. Tomorrow would bring its own work breakfast at 5, coffee at 4:30. The eternal cycle of feeding hungry men and tending growing things. But tonight, with her daughter's warm weight in her arms and her husband's laughter carrying on the evening air, she was simply grateful. "Are you coming in?" Thomas called from the kitchen. "Coffee's getting cold." "Coffee's never cold in this house," she called back. "And if it is, you know where the stove is." His laughter joined Evan's, and she went inside to her family, her home, her life. The frontier was still hard, still dangerous, still demanding, but it was theirs, earned with sweat and courage and the refusal to give up. The ring that she'd once tried to trade for bread now sat quiet in its box, a reminder that sometimes the things we think are endings are really beginnings in disguise. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we find exactly where we belong, not through plan or intention, but through the simple act of saying yes to possibility and fighting for what matters. As night settled over Calder Creek Ranch, the creek sang its endless song, and inside the reinforced walls of a house that had survived siege and emerged stronger, a family prepared for another dawn, another day of work and purpose and love. The end came not with drama, but with quiet certainty. They were home, they were together, and that was enough. More than enough, it was everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Leave a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Nora and Evan's journey. Your support means everything. And I can't wait to bring you more stories from the American frontier *.